Good day, learners. How are you doing today? I trust you are doing well. You are welcome to Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. My name is Emmanuel, and I'll be teaching you history. Today, we'll be looking at abolition of transatlantic slave trade. The abolition of transatlantic slave trade. At the end of the lesson, students will 1. Describe the concept abolition and abolitionist. 2. Explain the reasons for the abolition of transatlantic slave trade. 3. Students will identify and discuss the activities of the transatlantic slave trade abolitionists. Also, students will examine the effects of the abolition of transatlantic slave trade on Europe, America, and Africa. What is abolition? Abolition is the process of ending a system, practice, or institution. A process that has to do with ending and putting a stop or termination of a system or a practice. In the context of transatlantic slave trade, the abolition of transatlantic slave trade has to do with putting an end to the inhuman slave trade that happens through the Atlantic Ocean. The abolitionists. Abolitionists are a diverse group of people who come together and aimed towards putting an end to the slave trade. Reasons for the abolition of slave trade. Why was slave trade transatlantic slave trade abolished? Number 1, the rise of humanitarian and scholars in Europe. They condemned the slave trade. We have some scholars that condemn the slave trade. 2, industrialization in Britain. It got to a point whereby there was industrial revolution in Britain, where there were now need for lesser number of human labor. 3, the formation of anti-slavery movements. There were some anti-slavery movements that started springing up at some point. Then also the attainment of the independence of USA in 1776. The Atlantic slave trade has to do with from Europe to Africa, from Africa to the Americas, down back to the Europe. The transatlantic slave trade involved the Americans. So when America gained her independence, it could no longer relate or have trade with Europeans. Also, Wilberforce, Williams Wilberforce was a member of the British Parliament. He also played a significant part towards the Slave Trade Act of 1807. Then also there were numerous instances of resistance and uprising within the enslaved Africans. They resisted. They fought for their freedom themselves as well. Very good example is the Haitian Revolution that took place between 1791 and 1804. Activities of abolitionists in transatlantic slave trade. Number one, William Wilberforce. In fact, William Wilberforce is one of the key and the major abolitionists. Was a member of the British Parliament, and he played a significant role towards the passage of Slave Trade Act in 1807 that led to the abolition of the inhuman trade of persons. Also, Granville Sharp, he was an English scholar, he was a writer. He ensured that he wrote different articles on pamphlets, articles on books that was published, aimed at the abolition and putting a stop to this transatlantic slave trade. 3. Thomas Clarkson was an English abolitionist as well, and he was one of the leading activists in the campaign to abolish the slave trade as well. He co-founded the society known as the Society for Effecting the Abolition of Slave Trade in 1787. All these movements worked towards terminating the slave trade. Also, Oladan Ekono was a Nigerian who was also enslaved and kidnapped when he was a child. When he grew up, he was able to fight for himself. He wrote a book about his story in 1789 and wrote a lot of things that contributed towards putting a stop and permanent termination of the slave trade. The effect of the abolition of slave trade in Africa. Number one is population recovery. When it was abolished, Africa was able to recover some of the populations. Because when it was abolished, it was declared that the slaves in captivity should be returned back. They should be returned back to their region. So they were population recovery. Also, collapse of economy dependent on slave trade. Yes, the law of region, kingdoms, empires that depended so much on the revenue they get on slave trade. These regions collapsed. Many of them collapsed because the revenue, the huge revenue gotten from the slave trade, many of them have diverted their economy from other things like agriculture. They moved and depended solely on the slave trade. 3. Increased European colonial interference. Yes, even after the abolition of the slave trade, it led to increased interference. The British, they started, even despite that, they were trooping in deceitfully, claiming that they want to ensure that the slave trade has truly been abolished. But the main target was what? Colonial influence, which was what eventually led to colonialism. Also, continued social dislocation. The long history of transatlantic slave trade left deep scars in the hearts of many Africans. That after it was abolished, many people who had lost their relatives, who has lost their fathers, their mothers, their grandparents, their husband, their wife, their relative, all these set of people, they were still traumatized. It had the transatlantic slave trade had psychological effect on the people involved. Even after the abolition, despite the fact that it has been declared illegal, this social dislocation persists. Also, the introduction of new economic activities one of the effects of the abolition is that it moved away from slave trade and legitimate trade was introduced, which was a trade that has to do with legal commodity and goods like palm oil. Practice question. Highlight any 5 factors that contributed to the continuous participation of Nigerians after the abolition of the slave trade. After the Atlantic slave trade was abolished, many Nigerians still participated. And the answers are: 1, the trade was profitable. Yes, that was why many regions actually depended on it. They get lots of revenue, huge revenue from it. 2, the continuous practice of the European merchants encouraged them. Despite the fact that it was declared illegal and it was declared abolished, some European merchants, especially from France and some neighboring European powers, are still encouraging the Africans. They are still trooping in to still get it. Just that it has reduced and it has been declared illegal. 3, the legitimate commerce took a long time before it can bring profit and create wealth for the Africans. Legitimate trade like palm oil, groundnut, and the likes do not bring huge revenue as much as the slave trade was giving. Some of them were impatient. That was part of the reason why there was what? Continuous participation. Also, the middlemen and merchant princes were afraid of losing their position. So at that time, there are some people who act as middlemen whose role were majorly to get European merchants, link them up with African rulers. They get their share after the business of the slave trade has been done. All these set of people, they were struggling not to lose their position and benefits. Lastly, some of the geographical locations were not favorable enough for the cultivation of imported cash crops. This is the end of today's class.
Eko Learners Support, a support program of the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education for WAEC and NECO candidates.
If you have any feedback, comments, or suggestion, kindly reach us on any of our social media platforms displayed on the screen. Thank you for watching.